Professor Hazony, you don't need any introduction. You are a well-known philosopher, and from my personal vantage point of view, you are in many ways the successor to one of my favorites, Sir Roger Scruton. I don't know if you approve of that description, but that's one way I look at you.
Thank you, sir. That's a great honor, and thank you for having me on your program.
I am a kind of regular but not fixed contributor to ThePrint. So that a little bit of introduction of me for you. Not an academic, have been a business person, a banker, and then ran an IT company and so on, and an investor. I've written 4 books, one a poetry book many, many years ago. And then in recent times, 3 books, Notes from an Indian Conservative, The Indian Conservative, and Economist Gandhi. So in a sense, I do have some fondness and affiliation for Burkean conservatism, where you, of course, are one of the gurus today. What I'd like to talk to you about is a little bit about your latest concerns. One is the relentless attack on nations and nationalism. Where do you think that's coming from?
Well, it's a combination of things. I mean, this kind of phenomenon, it's very difficult to identify just one cause. For sure, there is since the Second World War, there's been a delegitimization of the idea of independent nations and nationalism, and that is the result of the fact that Adolf Hitler and the Nazis referred to themselves as nationalists. Now, that
all of us then become pseudo Hitlers, do we?
Well, that's unfortunately, it's very common for people who are conservatives and nationalists to be accused of being fascists and Hitler. We need to understand what it is that happened during the 19th century. Being a supporter of national independence was considered to be a generous, a liberal, a progressive kind of a point of view. In the 19th century, people who were arguing that India should be an independent nation, or that Israel should be an independent nation, or Ethiopia, for example, this was a point of view that was considered to be reformist and an attempt to make the world more liberal. After Hitler claimed nationalism as his slogan, right after the Second World War, Marxists and liberals switched to a point of view that said, look, national independence is a terrible doctrine. It's an evil doctrine. If you give Germany its independence, then you bring disaster to the world. And so there's been a growing movement of liberals and Marxists, both, beginning with the intellectuals in the 1950s and 60s, arguing that, in fact, Europe should eliminate independent nations, and that the goal of the world should be to have a single rule of law. Today it's called globalism or liberal internationalism. All of these are perspectives that say, no, independent nations are evil, and we should
not just bad, they're evil.
They're evil.
I want to interject a little bit. Mahatma Gandhi was a nationalist, and no one is going to suggest that he was a fascist. He was as democratic as they come. But he was a very firm nationalist. He also was a common law trained barrister from the Inner Temple in London. And one of the statements he has made is that to take an extreme case and to make a law out of that is always bad law. So you take the extreme, almost delusional, deranged Nazi thing, and then set that up as a straw man and make that enemy for even, moderate people like Mahatma Gandhi. It's so ridiculous, but that seems to be the way the fashions have evolved.
Yes, I think it's important to try to look. Obviously, any kind of political theory can be extreme and can be destructive. It's like the argument about whether it's better to have a monarchy or a republic. And the truth is that there are good kings and evil kings, and there are good republics and evil republics. But still, when we discuss political theory, we'd like to try to understand whether it's better to have a monarchy or a republic. So the same thing is true when we're thinking about independent nations and empires. There are better and worse empires. There are better and worse independent nations. And still, it's worth asking the question in general, as a general principle, is the world better off if we allow a world of independent nations in which nations are able to pursue their own course, or are we better off with a globalist system in which there's a single order and all nations need to be subject to it? And as you know, I think that the answer is pretty clear, that the problem with Napoleonic imperialism or Nazi imperialism or communist imperialism, the problem is always the same, which is that one particular ruler or one particular nation trying to govern the entire world is something that I think cannot be good for us. It has to be problematic.
I want to kind of drag you in, since you're in India, to a peculiar Indian nationalist issue or problem or whatever. See, India is an interesting kind of nation state which really did not have administrative and political unity until the British created it, but has had some kind of continuous and continuing cultural unity going back, not just centuries, probably millennia. The same kinds of things recur in different parts of the country, even if they're in different languages. And it's very easy for a person to relocate from one part of India to another and feel at home. It's not being at home. Whereas if he did relocate to the West or to Japan, the Indian would feel not at home.
Yes, for sure.
So that's the kind of national identity situation we're in. We also have a lot of subnational identities. And it's very interesting that these subnational identities tend to very quickly become quasi-Nazi, tend to become very cruel. A Kashmiri subnational identity ends up killing and ethnically cleansing Kashmiri Hindu Pandits. Today, in a northeastern state of Manipur, where for a long time there has been a subnational Manipur identity, there's major clashes between two groups within Manipur. And in fact, it is the nation state, or which you can even call it the imperial nation state of India, which from Delhi has to intervene to create justice and those ideals in these subnational enclaves that have arisen. So how does one deal with this subnationalism, again, without caricaturing them as Nazis, but realizing that there is somehow a creative tension between a culturally distinct, if not united, and administratively only 200 years of unity, state, which is trying to keep these local tensions in a Manipur or a Kashmir or somewhere else within bounds so that all citizens are able to flourish?
Look, human beings are, they by nature form into groups, and those groups compete, and they often, that competition leads to conflict. I think that that's simply a part of being human. If we're not going to be utopian about it, then we need to understand that tribal conflict is as old as human beings, and when tribes are united into a nation, what you're calling subnationality, we can call them tribes or we can call them something else. It doesn't matter. The point is that when you have groups competing and they're unified by some kind of cultural inheritance. I don't mean that that the different groups are identical. All the different groups are different. Every nation has a great variety. Diversity happens not just in a vast nation like India, but also America is very diverse. Britain is very diverse. France is very diverse, even though they pretend that they're not. Even a small country like Israel, to say that it's homogenous is absurd. Anybody who knows Israel, which is only 10 million people, knows that there are many different religions and many different cultures, and among Jews, a great many tribes of different kinds among the Jews of Israel. And so when we speak about nationalism, the idea of national independence, we're actually talking about two different things at the same time. One is an attempt to cultivate a certain unity, a certain inheritance that is shared by most of the tribes of a given nation. That's one goal. Is to create this unity and cohesion and loyalty among the different groups. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, there's another goal, which is to try to maintain an independence from other nations so that you don't end up with one world empire. Obviously, this is these two goals are the situation that we're in with respect to these two goals is constantly changing. There's no permanent solution to the problem that different groups compete with one another. But peace and justice and prosperity are always the aim of a nation that's trying to hold the different parts together and trying to prevent themselves from being conquered by somebody else.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Till 1962, there was a political party in southern India, the DMK, which actually advocated secession. But when the Sino-Indian conflict of 1962 happened, the leader, Anandare, said, oh my God, if we keep fighting, then the Chinese are going to conquer all of us. And that is not good. So he gave up the secessionist plank and wanted to work within the fold of the Republic of India. So this idea of not wanting to be conquered by someone else, I think even in the Northeast, most of my friends from that part of the country who are constantly having all these differences, they are scared of being ruled by the Chinese, and they're quite close to the Chinese. So that usually tends to bring them together, because the fear of a ruthless outside conqueror, with all its faults, the Indian nation state at the end of the day is relatively soft, and I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't occasionally indulge in brutality when it's necessary, when it sees survival at stake, but in general it's a soft state, and it's an accommodating state. So I think people are able to see that, and I think this idea of the external thing, it's a very important point. I'm going to take that away from our discussions as a learning out there. What about this whole issue? We talked about switching from nationalism to empires. The British Empire has received a lot of criticism in the last 50, 70, 80 years. But I have a theory that, unlike the French, who sent a lot of settlers into Algeria, except in sparsely populated countries like Australia, the British didn't send any settlers into India. At its peak, they had a couple of 100,000 people in this country. And it was a different kind of an empire. And in fact, you could argue that in South Africa, British intervention was probably helpful to Indians and blacks against the Afrikaners. And the British departure, giving the Afrikaners free hand, was in fact not good. So there's a case for some kind of imperial, as long as it's not the French-Algerian kind of imperialism, don't you think?
Well, I think there's arguments on both sides. I mean, there's a wonderful new book by Professor Nigel Bigger.
Oh yes, colonialism.
On colonialism, and he goes to quite a lot of in depth into the question of to what extent should we be hostile to the imperial inheritance. I think the bottom line is that it's a mixed bag. In the West, there are certainly many people who appreciate the turn of the British Empire against the institution of slavery, and for sure there were
Wilberforce and so on. Yeah.
Yes, and that was not simply something that took place in Britain. I mean, it was really a global project of the British Navy to try to stamp out slavery. Now, I don't think that means that we should simply be looking for somebody like the British to be the new empire ruling the world. I don't really know who that would be.
No, but I think admitting that there were some benign and maybe even positive features, which is something that we've kind of more or less consistently denied from 1950 till recently, I think that might be something that's worth doing.
I think anything that brings a greater sophistication to this conversation, which is usually just based on slogans, is desirable for sure. But having said that, I think that the present direction of the various imperial aspirations at this moment, I don't think Chinese imperialism is something that we should welcome.
Well, at least in this part of the world, let me tell you, none of us are fans of that one. Let me switch to a couple of elephants in the room, because I just want to make sure that I don't miss those things.
Sure.
We have this issue in India about whether we have an Indian nationalism or a Hindu nationalism. And the issue that I earlier alluded to, that our cultural unity tends to be along the lines of Hindu culture. In the sense, if you look at our culture, traditional culture, by the arts, you look at painting, sculpture, dancing, drama, music, all of them are spiritual Hindu kinds of cultural expressions. So there is no such thing as classical Indian music, which is not a reaching out to the gods. There is no such thing as classical Indian dance, which is not dedicated to the great Lord. So so we are really a religious kind of cultural nation. And yet we do have non-Hindus in our midst, some of whom, in fact, a large minority, are descendants, or at least, if not physical descendants, intellectual descendants of erstwhile conquerors who ruled large parts of our country. And therefore, there's always that old tension between the conquered and the conquerors. So we're wrestling with all of these things. And Hindu nationalism, from the leftist point of view, has gotten a lot of bad press. And yet, it has somehow emerged as a fairly cohesive political doctrine. And I don't believe it is wicked the way the leftists make it out to be. What do you see? I mean, what do you see these creative tensions, and how do they tend to get progress and get resolved?
Part of the picture has to be understanding that there is another kind of imperialism, which is the imperialism of liberal enlightenment of the European Union. Mm-hmm. And that kind of attempt to create a single world, a new world order, as President Bush once said, it invariably clashes with any kind of traditionalist nationalism, whether it's Hindu nationalism or Christian nationalism or Jewish nationalism or any other kind. The liberal worldview is based on the Enlightenment liberal worldview is based on a theory that there is a single political system that
all people are the same,
right? That all people, all nations have to come to agree with Enlightenment liberalism as the answer to how a country should be run, and there isn't any way. Hindu nationalism, like other forms of traditional nationalism, I'm sure that there are parts of it that are more unpleasant, and there are parts of it that are extremely tolerant and generous. But neither kind can really live with a secular universalist rationalist theory that says that India has to be like the European Union. India can't be like the European Union.
And I want to actually do a segue a little bit. I'll come back to my other elephant in the room, which is we've been arguing now for some time in India that our problem is adopting Western Enlightenment vocabulary to describe ourselves. When there's this whole thing that we've let this doctrine actually enter into our minds. Take the word religion. It's a kind of Latin-derived word, I believe. And it's all about, a lot of it is about what you believe, faith. Whereas there is no word for religion in Sanskrit or any of the ancient Indian languages like Tamil. We have Sampradaya, Marga, which are, paths, traditions. We don't even have a proper word for belief. When I say I believe in Shiva, what I mean is I trust him, that he will take care of me. The Lord will take care of me. It's not a belief in Immaculate Conception or resurrection, which are kind of the way the West has defined religion. And we have fallen into that trap. And one of the things, I think, reasons that Hindu nationalism is getting the bad press it's getting is because many of the Hindu nationalist thinkers are trying to respond to that trap instead of saying, we won't rise to this thing. We have our own civilizational vocabulary, Sanskrit, Tamil, Kannada. We will define ourselves in our way. What do you think of that? Do you think that's a clever way of dealing with these guys?
I think there's no choice.
Yeah.
I think that nations are different from one another, and national traditions and are different from one another. But having said that, this may surprise you, but in Judaism we have a very similar problem that there's no word for religion.
I'm not surprised, actually.
There's
Yeah.
no word for religion in the Hebrew Bible. There's a word for law. But there's also a word for truth, except the truth in Hebrew, emunah, emet and emunah, mean that it's reliable, that it's trustworthy. So it's actually very similar to what you're describing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think dharma, virtue, we have a word. I mean, actually, dharma is a little bit more than virtue, because for us, dharma is also that which sustains the universe. It's dharma is it's virtue, but it also is the one that sustains the different complexities in the universe and the tensions at the same time. The other elephant in the room, before I forget, we've been dealing with this issue that if you go back 100 years to European writing, particularly British writing about India and Indians, it was the British right which looked down on Indians, particularly on Hindus, as oily, cunning, cowardly, fat, unmanly. Unmanly is a favorite English word to describe Hindus. And I believe it was also the right in Europe which looked down on your Jews in very similar ways, cunning, shysters, etc. Today, it's reversed itself. It's the left, particularly in America and in England and parts of Europe, which looks down on Hindus. We're now accused of being majoritarian and fascist. I mean, till yesterday we were cowardly. Now we have become violent and bigoted. So, and I see the same thing with anti-Semitism. It's now become a leftist doctrine and not one on the right. Do you see some insights we can gain from looking at it this way?
Yes, there is some truth to that. I think that if you ask who today in North America or in Europe and in Britain, who is it who will be sympathetic to the idea that there should be an independent Hindu state, that there should be an independent Jewish state, and that other such nations should be supported? I think it's true that it's mostly conservatives.
Right.
That's primarily because over the last two generations, there's been a tremendous shift where, as you suggest, the left is supportive for the most part of an idea of one world order with one ideology. And what we call nationalist conservatives in America and Europe are, for the most part, people who are saying, we don't want one world order. We want an independent Britain. We don't want Britain to be part of the European Union. We want it to be independent and to have its own traditions. And we see a similar point of view in Italy, in Hungary, in Poland. And if you look at the American presidential election, it's on the right. The contest between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis is a competition between two nationalists, two national conservatives. Both of them, I think, whichever of them wins, are likely to be very sympathetic to Hindu India and to Jewish Israel. Just like they will be, because they want us to be sympathetic to a more traditional conservative America. Mm-hmm. Whereas the left is, in our generation, locked into the idea of a world order that will overcome all of these things.
Another segue. When 9/11 happened, I remember calling up one of my American friends and warning him that the American left is going to become pro-Islamist. because the left, particularly in American and European academia, is so anti-American and anti-capitalist that anybody who's anti-American, they are going to support. And very soon they coined this expression, Islamophobia, to anyone who wants to have an analytical discussion on Islamic issues. You're an Islamophobe. And you see the strange, very strange alliance. But of course, Foucault did that even at the time that Khomeini came to power. Foucault wrote a long paper supporting the Iranian Khomeini revolution. We should have learned right then that this devil's bargain and this coming to bed of these two forces is going to happen. And unfortunately, my prediction has come true.
Yes, it is coming true, and it is unfortunate. I think that in India, like in Israel and in European countries as well, there is a great desire to incorporate Islamic populations into the conservative side of the political spectrum. I think nobody would be happier than American or European conservatives if the Muslims were to say, as conservatives, our values are conservative. We want to join with our Christian and our Jewish and our Hindu friends in defending traditional values and traditional perspectives against this universal Marxism. Mm-hmm. But as you say, this is not what's happening. In many places, there is a close alliance between radical Muslim groups who are accusing the Christian powers, the Hindu powers, and of course in Israel, the Jewish state, of persecuting Muslims. And for reasons that are not entirely clear to me, they find it more convenient many times to ally themselves with revolutionaries who I think in the end, if in any of these countries, if the Muslims and the Marxists win, it's going to be a very, very bitter showdown between the Marxists and
That's happened in Iran. I mean, yes. They killed all the Marxists after they came to power. So that's the kind of thing that would happen. I think, again, I know New York Times dislikes our prime minister, but he's quite an intelligent person. And he is trying to make the difference between the westernized Muslim elite leadership, which is talking about the secular humanism and making this alliance with the left, and what he calls about the backward indigenous Muslims. In other words, not descendants of Arabs or Persians who came here, but those who were local converts. And he's trying to do an outreach to them. It's kind of interesting. And he's also looking at conservative Muslim sects. He's very close to a sect called the Bohras. They're a Shia sect. And they are all in business and very conservative. They're very into capitalist production and distribution, if you will. And they have, he's quite close with them. So he's trying to see if there is some reach out so that we're able to detach the Muslim, not the leadership, but at least large sections of them away from the Marxist leftist embrace.
Look, it's a crucial effort. It's something that has to be tried, and of course, I hope for his success. At the same time, my own experiences with dialogue between Jews and Muslims in Israel have not been terribly encouraging, because this kind of dialogue and alliance between groups, it requires both sides to look for a kind of a mutual loyalty and a collaboration. Mm-hmm. And in situations where a Muslim, a growing Muslim minority feels that, now I'm talking about the leadership and not necessarily the whole
the
population.
leaders, yeah.
But where the leadership feels that that their political advantage is in rejecting compromise. They feel that they always gain more by
maximalism. I call it maximalism.
Through accusations, through trying to stir the media up. If you're a Muslim in Israel, a Muslim leader, and you feel that you will simply gain much more in terms of political standing and power through being a bitter opposition party, then it's just very difficult to find an appropriate way to bring that to an end. And I think we have to be realistic about it.
It's very tough. And particularly in our part of the world, remember that the maximalists under Mr. Jinnah actually won out. They rejected every compromise, and finally they got a country. They were able to partition British India, which the British considered one of their great achievements, the unification of the subcontinent, by simply not compromising, hanging in there endlessly. So there is some evidence that works for the leadership. It's not clear to me that it's worked for the benefit of the Pakistani population at large. And certainly the Bangladeshi population didn't think so and left after a few years. So, but for the leadership, it certainly worked. They would not have had such leadership positions in a united India. And the bureaucracy, the Pakistani civil servants, would never have become big shots in a united India the way they became in Pakistan. They all became ambassadors and this and that. In a united India, their opportunities would have been less. So those elite groups did benefit, and they've seen that. So having seen that, is there a case that they will continue to pursue, at least the leadership, maximalism? Although I am not completely pessimistic, but I know it's very difficult. It's an uphill task, what you're talking about. A couple of more issues I wanted to touch on. In this whole conservatives, we believe in family and things like that. We do believe in kind of restrained change, yes, but gradual change and constructive change in all the Burkean propositions or Disraeli Coningsby propositions. But in some areas, like this LGBTQ thing, I have been arguing that, in fact, we don't need to get carried away. At least within India, in our culture, there's always been space for transgenders. They have their own temples, their own festivals, and they're part of society. They're not kind of stoned or killed or anything like that. And this present government again recognized that. They gave one of the national awards to a transgender musician or artist. And again, the secular brigade got very upset that this transgender person made a very traditional Hindu gesture when did this to the president and blessed when took the award. It's something the transgenders have been doing in our country for centuries. You invite them when a child is born and they come and sing songs and things like that. And the secular brigade got absolutely upset because they see this not as accommodating, but as somehow binary or for, against, and that kind of, it worries me.
Well, look, again, I think that having a variety of cultures with a variety of approaches, I think that we're best off if different nations will try different things and we'll see how it works. In the current debates in the West, the issue of homosexual rights and trans rights, all of these issues have become central because they are an instrument of the cultural revolutionary left, whose goal is to destroy the the biblical and Christian inheritance of Western countries. And I would be careful about how Hindu nationalists should think about this, only because the goal of the left is going to be to undermine and to destroy Hindu national.
Yeah, I wrote a piece on this as almost like unasked for advice to our Supreme Court, which is discussing this whole issue of gay marriage. I think the judgment will be out next month, saying we don't in our traditions have anything against gays, but I don't think we can legitimately use the word marriage, which is a sacrament for us, in the context of two persons of the same sex living together. And it's interesting. I got a fair amount of positive feedback from quite a few people saying this is, is it the court's job? That's the other thing. Because our members of parliament, they know they'll lose an election if they vote for gay marriage. So they're never going to do it. So they outsource this to the courts, and the courts tend to be woke, and they do some stuff, and then we have to live with that. But I think this whole issue of judicial executive conflict is going on in Israel too right now.
Oh, that's for sure.
Yeah.
In Israel, the left is for 30 years, the Supreme Court in Israel, since the 1990s, has adopted a policy of assigning to the Supreme Court unilaterally the authority to make final ultimate determinations, not only about which laws are permitted in the country, but also which policies of the executive, which appointments of the executive. I mean, there is no limit. There has been no limit for 30 years to the Israeli Supreme Court's willingness to overthrow the other branches of government in their policies, their appointments, and their laws.
Have you noticed the interesting thing that in the US, now that there's a conservative Supreme Court, they suddenly want to change the constitution, increase the number of judges. I mean, in other words, they like the Warren Court, and they like that expansionist, kind of woke leftist thing. But the moment that changes, then they're willing. Whereas right now we have very similar issues in India. Because there was a lot of abuse of executive power under Indira Gandhi in the 60s and 70s, Supreme Court decided that judges would be appointed by the Supreme Court. Okay? They just send it to the president, and the cabinet has no choice but to approve. And they've stuck to that. And the rest of us are saying, wait a minute. And there's a lot of issues, because there's also a lot of children of judges becoming judges and so on, and things like that. So, once you open this up, then you can get all kinds of, we'll see how it works out. And for the time being, because I think so many of us are scarred, but by what Indira Gandhi did to the judges, we are more comfortable letting the judges appoint their successors, but I'm not so sure that will last forever. I want to come back to your favorite man, Burke. Are you aware, I mean, I'm sure you are, that Burke hated the East India Company? Just like he supported the American colonists, he had some very imaginative views on British imperialism in India.
Yes, and I think to a certain degree that is something that is common to quite a number of conservative English and also Scottish thinkers. That
Adam Smith, yeah,
Adam Smith, David Hume. I also think that John Stuart Mill, who is constantly berated for his support for imperialism, but I think that there's some extremely skeptical passages about the possibility of successful British rule in India in his writings.
He's not very popular here because his father, James Mill, was an extremely racist and overbearing historian of India who wrote a history of India without ever visiting the country.
No,
so that's one reason we tend to be skeptical a little bit about John Stuart Mill. But the thing that Burke also, by the way, Burke was saying, if we're going to rule India, historical accident, whatever, we're doing it, let's do it through a parliamentary commission. So then there would have been members of parliament from both Whig and Tory factions there, 5-10 of them, and they would, and which means as political currents changed in England, they would affect India. So if they became, anti-slavery, then they would say, hey, we should be, whatever. It was turned down by the king and I think Lord North or Will Pitt, I don't know, because they wanted to keep patronage for the East India Company jobs with the executive. So they didn't want it to go to the MPs. I still believe that if Burke's ideas had prevailed, the Indo-British encounter may have been more productive.
I think this is also true in the American case and in the Irish case. I mean, Burke was certainly interested in increasing local rule as a general principle, which you see throughout his career. Yeah. In that sense, until the French Revolution, that's the reason that he was part of the Whigs, the left of center, up until the French Revolution. And I think what you're saying is correct, but we also need to remember that that the modern Conservative Party, the Tories, really are to an extent founded by Burke. Burke breaks with the Whigs over the French Revolution, and the meaning of that is that he was willing to discuss all sorts of reforms and improvements in the way that the British Empire worked, and in general to seek greater justice and constitutionality in the different parts of the empire.
And with greater respect, the Whigs had profound contempt for the traditions of foreign countries. Whereas Burke, there's a brilliant speech of his in the House of Commons on the Prince of Arcot's debts, where he refers to the number of canals and reservoirs and lakes built by Indian kings, not for their benefit, but for the benefit of succeeding generations. Burke is very big on this intergenerational justice and trust. It's a brilliant speech. So he did kind of sensitize himself that not everything, because they're a conquered people or they've lost a few wars, doesn't make them and their traditions completely ridiculous or ready to be thrown in the garbage bin,
Well, that's the reason that he's so popular among nationalists, because even though he's living in an imperial country in an imperial age, his direction is certainly to respect and to want to promote self-rule and the inheritance of different cultures. He's certainly on our side, but when it comes to attempting to impose a universal theory, like liberalism,
has universal instincts, but conservatism is not a universal theory.
No, conservatism is simply not a universal theory. The conservatives are quite skeptical of any kind of attempt to reach something universal. Now, it's interesting that's not because British or English conservatives are skeptical about there being laws, natural laws, things that are in principle true. No conservative will say that murder or theft should be allowed anywhere, but the skepticism of the conservatives, and this is really an understanding, a theory of knowledge, that human beings are very, very poor at identifying universal truths. And so whereas liberals and Marxists are always talking about how obvious it is, here's the universal truth for mankind, a common denominator of virtually all conservatives is a skepticism to say, God, creator of heaven and earth, knows rules and laws that are best for mankind, but we human beings are terrible at determining what they are. And when we set out to try to teach the whole world the truth, we usually end up getting carried away.
Yeah, work is completely absent from all Indian textbooks. There's a lot on Rousseau. There's too much on Marx, but there's nothing on Burke. And that is a pity. But I've argued that the high watermark of 19th century Indian conservatism is a lecture in 1895 at the Indian Social Congress by Bhandarkar. Bhandarkar, by the way, was a profound scholar of the Western tradition and a great Sanskritist. He's, in fact, the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute in Pune is named after him. So he's a great, R.G. Bhandarkar. And he makes this statement. He says, because it was a social congress, it was not the political congress. Nevertheless, he says, as we are looking for social and political change, and we have to change, for he was very opposed to untouchability and so on. We have to change. But let us not imitate the violent changes of the French. Whether we like it or not, Providence has associated us with the British, who have changed their laws and made them more humane, but done it gently, slowly, without jettisoning the good things of their past. Bhandarkar says this in 1895. It's a brilliant speech. I consider that the high watermark of Indian conservatism. Unfortunately, we got independence in 47, 2 years after 45, when Labour Party was in power in Britain and so on. And the conservative cause lost out. Also, many conservatives were seen as traitors for having collaborated with the British. Tej Bahadur Sapru, Madan Mohan Malavya. Some of them, they did not take, they were like the Tories in New York in 1770s who migrated to Ontario, that kind of people. The result is we've just slipped. The entire academia, journalism, bureaucracy went the leftist way. And by the 70s, it was conscious. We had an education minister who consciously said, I am going to create Marxist PhDs so that 20 years from now, every single academic institution will be dominated by us Marxists. It was worse than Gramsci and Marcuse's machinations. This was a minister, a political leader, and this was implemented. So we lost. We're coming back, but it's a hard grind.
Well, unfortunately, the great successes of what's called woke neo-Marxism in America and Europe in the last few years are, I think, paving the way for a very strong conservative reaction against them.
Yeah,
I don't know who's going to win, but I think that that in America and Europe, the reaction is growing very quickly. And many people who used to be sympathetic to a revolutionary liberalism or Marxism are feeling that it's gone too far. And that
many feminists are walking away from it.
As a conservative country, a fundamentally traditionalist, religious, conservative democracy, India is going to, I think, is going to find common cause with nationalists and conservatives in the West in the coming years, and it's both sides, I think, can benefit immensely from this collaboration.
I think so, but let me tell you where our real problem is. There's a big thing called Indian studies in Western academia, and it is dominated entirely by Marxists and Freudians. In fact, and it's impossible to get a tenure track job if you're not one of them. in the Indian studies departments in any Western university. And they have disproportionate influence over Indian universities. There's a lot of going back and forth and things like that. That's the one we need to break, because that is also brainwashing succeeding generations of very bright students.
And again, this is familiar from from Jewish studies and Israel studies, and more generally, you're describing a pattern that has established itself in Western academia. But pay attention to the way that the American public views academia now. I think this week I saw a poll that said that American confidence in higher education is at 36%. 36% of Americans have confidence in the universities in America. This is down 25 points just in a handful of years. So I think that this is something that, in India,
hopefully some funding will get cut off from these Marxists and Freudians. So that might help, because they do hold the purse strings right now.
Yes, that's likely to happen, but there's also the beginnings for the first time of a movement in more conservative states to establish conservative departments and programs. Now, I don't know if this is going to succeed, but it's a vast improvement over the uniform acceptance of academia just a few years ago. At this point, people are tired of it, and change is becoming possible for the first time.
Yeah, I think we've at least created, because the political situation has changed to our benefit, we're now able to at least get some traction. Not enough, not as much as we'd like, but some traction in this area. And the other big ally we have is the Indian middle class mother. She is relentlessly focused on the kids doing well in maths and science, and pushing them into engineering, accountancy, and medicine. So those are non-woke disciplines by definition. So we do have that reservoir. In fact, I am noticing many of the new conservative thinkers we have are Indian engineers settled in America. On retirement, they start becoming, so they're coming from outside the traditional PhDs in history and anthropology kind of thing. But they're brilliant and intellectuals, and they are making an impact.
For sure. And we even have in America a presidential candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, who associates himself with the nationalist conservatives on most issues. I think he's.
I'm sure his mother forced him to study maths, and that's a given. So yeah, no, it's been a great honor talking to you, Professor.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to further conversation.
Absolutely, thank you.